Part 1. The smile that cut deeper than any verdict. You'd think that after years behind a bench, listening to the worst of humanity spill out like poison, I'd be immune. Immune to lies, betrayal, cruelty. But nothing prepares you for the kind of cruelty that's brushed in blush, wrapped in chiffon, and delivered with a smile you've known your whole life. It was my sister Camille's engagement party. White roses, champagne flutes, gold-rimmed everything. The music was elegant, the laughter rehearsed. It smelled of money and desperation. I arrived 5 minutes early, as always, dressed in black, not because I wanted to make a statement, but because black fits. It fits the court. It fits silence. It fits me. She saw me right away. Her eyes found mine across the chandelier-lit ballroom. That smile tilted just so, like a dagger dipped in sugar, cut cleaner than any cross-examination I'd ever delivered. She turned to her friends, whispered something behind her hand, and they all glanced at me. Curious, dismissive, pitying. It didn't sting. Not at first. I'd faced murderers, CEOs, and con men who begged for mercy I didn't have to give. I'd watched families crumble from the witness stand, eyes filled with regret that arrived too late. But that night, in the middle of a room full of strangers pretending to be family, I realized something raw and permanent. The deepest betrayals don't come from criminals. They come from the ones who know exactly where your scars are buried. Camille was always the golden child, the dainty one, the darling. She knew how to play the game before she even understood the rules. Our parents adored her, as if her freckles were stardust and her tantrums were symphonies. Meanwhile, I was the shadow in the hallway, the intense one, the girl who read trial transcripts for fun and corrected grammar at dinner. I used to think there was something wrong with me, that if I were less serious, more bubbly, they'd love me louder. I learned to fold myself into the corners of rooms, to disappear into silence because silence was safer. Camille taught me that. Or maybe she didn't teach, maybe I just learned. By high school, she told people I was adopted from a library. That was her favorite joke. She'd laugh, and they'd laugh, and I'd pretend not to hear. I always heard. My mother called it just teasing. My father never looked up from his steak. No one asked what I was reading in those corners. No one asked what I dreamed of, so I stopped dreaming for them. I dreamed for myself. I graduated early. Law school followed, then the courtrooms, then the robes. My name started appearing in legal journals, then in newspapers. I mailed the article to my parents when I was appointed to the bench. No reply. Not even a text. I thought that silence would finally numb me, that I'd built enough walls, earned enough titles, worn enough dignity to keep their absence from touching me anymore. But then came the invitation. Camille's engagement. No dear Clarice. No mention of me at all. Just a card that reeked of floral perfume and pretension. And then her text. Hi, sis. Don't feel like you have to come if you're busy. Jonathan's family is very high profile. Maybe wear something light? Nothing too serious, okay? XXC. Too serious. As if I hadn't built a life on seriousness. As if the weight of justice itself hadn't rested in my voice for over a decade. As if I hadn't stood in courtrooms where men in $1,000 suits called me Your Honor with hands trembling. But Camille. She still saw the girl in thrift store blazers. The girl with cracked glasses and too many books. She never asked who I'd become. She never wanted to know. That was always the dynamic. She dazzled. I endured. But something shifted when I read that invitation. Something final. I wasn't going for her. I wasn't even going for them. I was going for the silence. The silence that had stalked me through every family dinner, every milestone ignored, every holiday phone call unreturned. The silence I had swallowed for years because I thought if I swallowed enough of it, maybe, just maybe, it would stop choking me. So I bought a dress. Tailored, black, understated. I booked a flight, declined the hotel room she offered, and arranged my own stay. And then I walked into the lion's den, not to roar, not to fight, but to no longer shrink. The estate was a hilltop mansion dressed like a magazine spread. Glass walls, manicured hedges, valet parking. Camille's name was in gold on the welcome sign. Jonathan's was smaller, fitting. Inside, I was greeted with a smile that didn't reach the hostess's eyes. "Welcome," she said, not knowing who I was. Of course she didn't. Camille didn't mention me. People swirled around the room like champagne bubbles. Sequins, lip gloss, empty flattery. I found a corner near a giant vase of flowers and stayed there, watching, like I'd always done. And then Camille found me. "Look who made it," she said, that same sugar-dipped smile on her lips. "Didn't think this kind of scene was your thing." "It usually isn't," I said, matching her tone, but I had time. Her eyes dropped to my dress. Black? Bold choice for an engagement party. I didn't explain. I'd stopped explaining years ago. She wouldn't understand black was what I wore when I needed to be taken seriously. Instead, I said, "Someone needs to ground the palate." She blinked, unsure if I was joking, then leaned in. "Just try not to make things awkward, okay? Jonathan's family, well, they're very big on appearances." I held her gaze. "Maybe they'll get real answers." She laughed. Performed it, loud and theatrical. "Classic Clarice," she sang. "Always so intense." Then she disappeared into the crowd before I could reply. Intense. That word had followed me my entire life like a caution label. Camille was bubbly. I was intense. She was adored. I was tolerated. She performed joy. I held truth. One got claps, the other got silence. Later, during dinner, Jonathan approached. Alone. "Clarice, right? Camille's sister?" I nodded. "That's me." "She doesn't talk about you much. I wasn't sure if you two were close." I tilted my head. "We're sisters." He chuckled nervously. "She said you do something... in-law?" Something like that. He didn't press. Why would he? Camille had probably painted a version of me that was easier to dismiss. Admin. Clerk. The serious older sister who lives alone with files and frowns. And that was fine, because lies have a half-life. Then came the speeches. Camille stood beneath the chandelier, glowing. She tapped her glass with a fork. Everyone turned, their phones lifted. "I just want to thank everyone," she beamed. "Truly, I feel so lucky." She paused, smiled. Growing up, I was the wild one. My sister Clarice, well, she was, let's say, very by the book. Laughter. She once filed a formal complaint because I borrowed her sweater. I was 13. More laughter. She's always been that way. Judgy, rigid. Honestly, I'm just shocked she showed up. She's not big on family gatherings or smiling. She looked at me, held my gaze, winked. The room laughed. I didn't move. Jonathan leaned in, grinning. "But really, Camille says you work in, what was it, county records?" I tilted my head, let the moment breathe. "No," I said calmly. "That's not correct." Camille giggled. "Don't be so dramatic." "I'm a judge," I said. Silence, immediate and thick. A woman at the next table gasped. "Wait, Judge Dalton?" Murmurs. Phones slipping from clutches to laps. Google searches began under napkins. A man coughed. Someone whispered, "The Eastman case?" Jonathan stared. "You're a judge?" "Superior Court, 11th District." Camille blinked. "I didn't know. You didn't ask." I stood slowly, folded my napkin. "When people don't ask questions," I said, "they shouldn't be surprised by the answers." And I walked out. No drama, no tears, just gravity, just truth. I left behind the noise, the laughter, the stories they told about me to make themselves feel better. Outside, the night was still, real, mine. Part 2, the price of being right. The night air hit me like a baptism. Cool, clean, honest. I could breathe again, not because anything was resolved, but because for once, I hadn't shrunk to fit someone else's script. I didn't drive away right away. I sat in my car with the engine off, the silence thick but not suffocating. It was the kind of silence that didn't demand anything. Not approval, not performance, just presence. Then my phone buzzed. 1 missed call, Mom. 2 new messages, Camille. You should have told me. Why would you embarrass me like that? Embarrass her. That was the wound talking. Not guilt, not reflection. Just the sting of being seen without her mask on. I didn't answer. I didn't owe anyone a performance anymore. And yet, I won't lie, there was a flicker of something else. Not quite satisfaction, but not regret either. It was quieter than vindication. More personal. Like finding a piece of yourself you thought you'd lost forever. And realizing it had never left. It had just been waiting. That feeling, whatever it was, wasn't about Camille. It wasn't about my parents. It was about me. The part of me that used to believe I had to earn love by disappearing. The part that thought if I got small enough, quiet enough, good enough, maybe they'd finally notice. They noticed now. But it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like truth. The next morning, I checked out of my hotel early and skipped the brunch Camille had planned. According to the itinerary she'd texted 3 days before, it was meant to be light, casual, just family. The irony didn't escape me. I flew home without incident, returned to my chambers like slipping into a second skin. My clerk, Jenna, greeted me with a grin and a stack of files. Big case broke over the weekend, she said. You're all over legal Twitter. I smiled faintly. Noted. What's first on the docket? We worked. We always did. And yet, under the robe and ritual, something lingered. Something heavy and unsaid. It wasn't the party, not really. It was the ache that comes after you speak your truth and realize nothing might change. No apologies. No reconnections. No cinematic reunions. Just silence. And the knowledge that you finally stopped begging for love from people who only ever offered conditions. 3 days passed before Mom called again. I let it ring. On the 4th day, she left a voicemail. Hi, honey. We were just surprised, that's all. Camille feels terrible. She didn't mean anything by what she said. You know how she gets. We're proud of you, of course. We just wish you wouldn't be so dramatic about things. Call me. There it was again. Dramatic. Not, we're sorry we never asked. Not, we're sorry we let Camille write your story in our family's eyes. Just please stop making us uncomfortable with your truth. I didn't call back. I wanted to, but not for her. I wanted to hear myself say it. You don't get to rewrite me anymore. Instead, I opened my laptop and wrote myself a letter. Not to be sent, not to be read aloud in court. Just a letter to the girl I used to be, the one who hid in corners with books and longings too fragile to name. The one who thought if she got enough degrees, she'd finally be invited to the table. Dear Clarice, I wrote, you were never invisible. They just refused to see you. I hit save and closed the document. And then, finally, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was letting go. Letting go of the version of myself that had spent 30 years trying to be understood by people who only loved the version of me they could ignore. A week passed. No word from Camille. No word from my father, who I imagined was still sitting in his leather chair with the newsprint folded just so, pretending that silence was strength. Maybe he told himself I was being emotional. Or ungrateful. Or, God forbid, ambitious. I had no idea what story Camille was spinning now, but I could guess. Maybe she was the wounded sister whose big day had been hijacked. Maybe she was the generous one who'd invited her difficult sibling out of pity. Maybe she was the victim of my ego. Let her. I'd spent enough years babysitting other people's narratives. What mattered now was this. I no longer saw myself through their eyes. I saw myself from the bench, from the late nights in law school. From the moment I walked into my first courtroom and felt something inside me settle. Because I was finally in a space that required clarity, not charm. Depth, not dazzle. In court, I was heard. In my family, I had been edited, no more. 2 weeks later, I received a package. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Camille. Inside was a card, gold embossed. Of course, it read, "I didn't mean to hurt you. You could have just said something. I was trying to keep things light. Jonathan's family is very traditional. I didn't want to make things weird. Hope you're okay." C. No apology, just justification. Just more spin. She still thought the problem was that I didn't correct her sooner. As if the years of silence, the birthday phone calls unreturned, the whispered jokes, the eye rolls, the dismissals, had all been figments of my seriousness. She still didn't understand. And I finally, fully, didn't need her to. I didn't reply. I lit a candle. I played Coltrane on vinyl. I sat on my sofa with a glass of wine and let the quiet wrap around me like a second skin. I had chased peace for years. Turns out, peace comes not when you're finally included, but when you stop auditioning. Part 3, the weight I no longer carried. Some people think healing is loud. They think it arrives with triumphant music. A final scene where the crowd claps, where someone says they were wrong and everything is mended with a hug and a teary smile. But for me, healing came in a parking garage. It was 2 months after the party. I was walking to my car, robe still draped over my arm, docket folder tucked beneath it. It had been a long hearing, corporate tax fraud, endless paperwork, 2 expert witnesses who couldn't agree on math. I was tired, but the kind of tired that isn't emptiness, it's quiet satisfaction. The kind that says, you showed up again today, you did the work. I reached my car, unlocked it, and just paused. No texts from Camille, no voicemails from my mother, no letters, no apologies, no invitations. And I felt light. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring, or the silence to end, or the family to shift just enough to let me back in. They could stay where they were. I wasn't trying to be let in anymore, because I had walked out on my own. The hardest part about letting go of dysfunctional love is that it doesn't feel broken all the time. There are soft memories. There are old photos and fleeting laughs and brief moments where things almost seemed whole. And those are the parts that keep you tethered. Not because they outweigh the hurt, but because they give the hurt a reason to linger. For years, I held on to those moments with Camille. The time she brought me a cupcake after my first law final. The road trip we took when I was 20 and she was 18, where we sang along to Fleetwood Mac and forgot for a weekend how far apart we really were. But healing, real healing, meant letting even those pieces go. Not erasing them. Not pretending they didn't matter. Just not letting them anchor me anymore. Because they were only fragments, and I deserved a full picture. I started walking more. I stopped checking my phone for messages that weren't coming. I went to jazz concerts alone. I joined a book club with retired librarians and overqualified therapists. I said yes to invitations I would have once ignored, because I was waiting for someone else to include me. I wasn't waiting anymore. I bought a new bookshelf and filled it only with things I loved, not things I thought would look impressive. I started cooking for myself the way I used to cook when I imagined someone would be watching. Turns out, feeding yourself with care is still sacred, even in solitude. One evening, I made spaghetti aglio e olio and sat at my table with a glass of Barbera. I looked across at the empty chair and didn't feel alone. I felt whole. Because the person I was sitting with, me, was finally enough. It wasn't until 6 months later that I heard from Camille again. A Facebook message. Simple. 2 sentences. Mom's birthday is next week. I know you're probably busy, but I thought I'd let you know. I stared at it for a while, and then I smiled. Not because it made me happy, but because I didn't feel anything at all. No anxiety, no resentment, just neutrality. I didn't need to respond. I didn't need to flare up with judgment or tenderness. It was just a message from someone I used to know more than they knew me. I closed the app and went back to reading. The book was about boundaries. Not the kind you draw in sand, but the ones you plant in stone, the kind that don't scream for attention, but speak calmly when the wrong people try to cross them. I'd lived most of my life in reaction to people who didn't ask the right questions, who loved me based on assumption, who made me work for space I was already entitled to. But the moment I stopped reacting, I started living. A year passed. I'd forgotten what it felt like to live without guilt humming beneath everything. Guilt for not calling, for not coming home, for not shrinking myself just enough to fit their fragile expectations. I didn't feel guilty anymore. I felt free. Free in the way people mean when they say it, but never live it. Free in my bones. Free in my choices. Free in my name. Judge Clarice Dalton. No one could take that from me, and more importantly, I no longer needed anyone to acknowledge it to make it real. I didn't need Camille's praise. I didn't need my mother's approval. I didn't need my father's silent nod from across a dinner table. Because I had mine. But healing, I've learned, doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering with honesty. There are still days I think of Camille. Wonder if she's happy. If Jonathan learned to ask deeper questions. If our parents ever sit across from each other and talk about the daughter they missed while she was standing right in front of them. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if we met again. If I sat across from Camille now, after everything, what would I say? Maybe nothing. Or maybe just this. You didn't break me, you buried me, and I grew. Last week, a woman approached me after court. She was maybe mid-30s, holding a leather portfolio and a hopeful smile. Judge Dalton? I nodded. I just wanted to say thank you. I'm studying law. I followed the Eastman case in school. The way you handled that sentencing, it made me believe there was still integrity in the system. I blinked. It wasn't the first time someone had said something like that. But this time, it landed differently. Because for most of my life, I had been starving for that kind of acknowledgement from people who refused to give it. And now, here it was. Freely offered. Earned, not begged for. I thanked her. We spoke for a few minutes. She left. And I stood there a while, hands in my pockets, heart steady. And then I whispered, just for me, "You're seen." I didn't mean her. I meant me. Somewhere in another state, Camille is probably planning something. A brunch, a baby shower, a photo shoot. I don't know. I don't need to. Because the truth is, my story no longer revolves around hers. Once upon a time, I believed the only way to belong was to be chosen. But now I know the truth. Belonging is not something you earn by disappearing. Belonging is the quiet conviction that you never had to audition in the first place. I was always enough. And now, finally, I believe it. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, let this be your reminder. Your worth doesn't depend on their approval. Drop A in the comments if you've ever had to reclaim your voice. And if this story touched you, hit subscribe. We tell real stories that speak to your heart.